It was just another quiet afternoon at the university. Eli had finished his classes for the day and was walking through the campus, enjoying the peaceful surroundings. The sun was beginning to set, casting a soft golden light over the trees and buildings. Eli had always loved these moments when everything felt calm and perfect. But today was different. A loud crash broke the tranquility, followed by the sound of something heavy scraping against the ground. Eli stopped in his tracks, his heart racing. He turned toward the source of the noise, a wooded area just beyond the campus. A strange, glowing object was visible through the trees, smoking and partially buried in the earth. It looked like something out of a science fiction movie. A metallic ship, much too advanced for anything Eli had seen before. Without thinking, Eli's curiosity got the better of him. He rushed toward the wreckage, his shoes crunching on the gravel path. As he got closer, he saw a figure moving near the ship. Someone, or something, struggling to get free. Eli's pulse quickened. He wasn't sure what to expect, but something told him that this wasn't just a regular accident. The figure staggered out from behind the wreck, and Eli's breath caught in his throat. It was a woman, but not like anyone he had ever seen before. Her skin shimmered in shades of violet and silver, and her eyes glowed with an otherworldly light. She wore a strange, tight-fitting suit that seemed to be designed for space travel, and her long hair flowed like liquid silver. Eli stepped forward cautiously, unsure of what to do. The woman looked at him with wide, desperate eyes. Her lips parted, but no words came out. She stumbled toward him, her legs shaking. It was clear she was hurt. She was limping, and there was blood on her clothes. "Are you okay?" Eli asked, his voice trembling. The woman's eyes flickered toward him, filled with a mixture of fear and confusion. She opened her mouth again, but no sound came out. Eli felt a strange pull in his chest, something he couldn't explain. He knew he had to help her. Without another thought, Eli ran forward, reaching out to steady her. "It's okay, I'll help you," he said, trying to sound reassuring. But the woman backed away, her eyes filled with fear. She shook her head weakly, her voice finally breaking through. "No, I must surrender." Her voice was soft, filled with pain. "They'll find me." "It's too late." Eli didn't understand. What was she talking about? Who was she running from? He could see the fear in her eyes, and for some reason, he knew he couldn't let her give up. "No," Eli said firmly, his heart racing. "You don't have to surrender. I won't let them take you." The woman's eyes widened in disbelief. "Why? You're human. You don't know who I am." Eli shook his head. "I don't care who you are. You need help, and I'm here to give it to you." For a long moment, the woman just stared at him, as if trying to figure out if he was serious. Then, with a slow, hesitant movement, she allowed him to help her. Her trust was fragile, but for the first time, she seemed to believe that maybe there was someone who cared enough to help her. Eli carefully helped the alien woman, whose name, he learned, was Vera, walk through the woods behind the university. Her steps were slow and unsteady, her body still weak from the crash. She didn't speak much, only offering short, quiet words when Eli asked her questions. The world felt heavy with silence, and Eli couldn't help but feel like he was walking beside something much bigger than himself. He had no idea what he had gotten himself into. As they reached a small cabin that Eli had hidden in the woods for moments like this, he helped Vera sit down on an old chair. She looked up at him, her violet eyes still filled with a mixture of fear and sadness. Her breathing was slow, labored, but she was alive. That was all that mattered for now. Eli couldn't stand the mystery any longer. He needed to know more about her. "Vera, you keep saying something about surrender. What does that mean? Who's chasing you?" Vera hesitated, her gaze drifting away as if she didn't want to remember the past. But Eli wasn't giving up that easily. "Please," he said softly, "you're safe here. I can't help you if I don't understand." She took a deep breath, her chest rising and falling slowly. And then her voice came, soft, yet filled with an undeniable sadness. I'm a princess. My family ruled a peaceful empire on my planet, one of the greatest civilizations in the galaxy. But all of that is gone now. Eli's eyes widened. A princess. This was more than he had ever imagined. He had assumed she was just a traveler or someone in trouble. But a princess. My own people betrayed me, Vera continued, her voice trembling. My cousin, the one I trusted most, staged a coup. He turned the whole empire against me. I had to run, escape, before they could capture me. If I'm caught, they'll kill me. They won't stop until I'm gone. Eli sat down across from her, his mind racing. She was telling him that she was from another world, another empire, and that the people she had trusted had turned on her. It was like something out of a storybook, but this was real. Why didn't you just surrender? Eli asked gently. You said you wanted to, but why didn't you? Vera's eyes locked with his, and for the first time, Eli saw a flicker of determination. I thought I could escape, she explained. But now I'm not sure. I've seen too much. The bloodshed, the betrayal. I've lost everything. I don't know if I even deserve to survive. Eli couldn't believe what he was hearing. He had only known her for a short time, but there was a strength in her he couldn't ignore. Vera wasn't just some helpless alien. She was a survivor. I don't know what your people have done, Eli said, but you deserve a chance. You don't deserve to die. Not like this. Vera looked at him in silence, as if searching for something in his words. Her face softened, and for the first time, a faint glimmer of hope returned to her eyes. You're different, she said, her voice quiet but sincere. Most people wouldn't have helped me. But you're offering me a chance. I never thought I'd find anyone like you, Eli. Eli's heart raced at her words. He had only meant to help, but hearing her say that, it felt like he had become part of something much larger than himself. And maybe, just maybe, he could be the one to make a difference. Eli couldn't stop thinking about what Vera had told him. A princess, exiled from her empire, hunted by her own people. It was almost too much to process. How had this alien woman, this princess, ended up crashing into the woods near his university? Why was he the one who had found her? Eli had always imagined his life would be simple. Studying, hanging out with friends, maybe one day getting a regular job. But now, his whole world had changed in a single afternoon. Sitting on the edge of his bed, Eli ran his hands through his hair, trying to make sense of it all. Vera was strong, brave, and full of mystery, but she was also hurt and scared. He didn't know what kind of dangers were out there, waiting to find her. All he knew was that he couldn't leave her alone. Somehow, in the short time they'd spent together, he felt responsible for her, like her survival depended on him. The question that kept running through Eli's mind was simple. Why had he helped her? He wasn't a soldier or a hero. He was just a regular college student. He had never imagined his life would involve an alien princess on the run from a galaxy of enemies. Yet every time he looked at her, her eyes filled with uncertainty, the way she spoke about her lost world. He knew he couldn't let her face this alone. There was something in Vera that he connected with, something he couldn't explain. She had lost everything, and now she was trusting him to help her. Eli walked over to the window and looked out at the darkening sky. It was hard to believe all of this was happening, that his life had suddenly turned into something out of a science fiction story. But the more he thought about it, the more he realized that this wasn't just some accident. He had been the one to find her. Maybe it was fate. Maybe it was meant to be. Eli? Vera's soft voice brought him out of his thoughts. He turned to see her standing in the doorway of the small cabin, her pale face still showing signs of exhaustion, but her eyes held a new determination. She had been quiet for a while, lost in her own thoughts, but now she was looking at him like she had made up her mind about something important. Yeah, Eli said, walking over to her. What's up? I've been thinking, she began, her voice calm but firm. I can't stay here forever. I need to go back to my planet, to my people. I need to reclaim my throne. Eli felt a lump form in his throat. He hadn't expected this. The thought of letting her go, of sending her back into the danger that had hunted her for so long, terrified him. But he couldn't stop her. He knew deep down that this was something she had to do for herself. You don't have to do this alone, Eli said quietly, his heart heavy with the weight of the decision. I'll help you, whatever it takes. Vera looked at him, her gaze softening. She hadn't expected him to offer to go with her, but the words felt right. She wasn't alone anymore. She had him. Thank you, Vera said, her voice filled with gratitude. I didn't think I could trust anyone, but now I see I was wrong. I'm not alone, and for that, I'm grateful. Eli smiled, a little unsure of what the future held, but feeling a strange sense of purpose settle in his chest. We'll figure it out together, he said, more to reassure himself than her, one step at a time. And just like that, Eli knew that whatever happened next, his life would never be the same again. Together, they would face the unknown, but no matter how hard it got, he wasn't going to let her face it alone. The air was thick with tension as Eli and Vera prepared to leave the cabin. They had to move quickly. Vera's condition had improved slightly over the last few days, but her enemies were still out there, searching for her. Eli had done everything he could to keep her hidden, but he knew it wouldn't be long before they found her. The longer they stayed in one place, the more dangerous it became. Vera paced back and forth, her mind racing with thoughts of what was coming next. She had been in hiding for so long, always running, always looking over her shoulder. The fear had become a part of her, something she couldn't escape. But now, with Eli by her side, it felt different. She felt a sense of hope that she hadn't felt in years. But that hope was fragile, and she knew it wouldn't last forever. Eli, Vera said, her voice low. We need to get out of here. They're getting closer. Eli looked out the small window of the cabin, his eyes scanning the surrounding woods. The quiet was unsettling. It was too peaceful, too calm. He knew something was coming. We'll leave at first light, Eli replied, trying to sound confident. But inside, he was nervous. He had no idea how they were going to escape, or even if they could. As night fell, the sound of distant engines reached their ears. At first, it was just a faint hum, barely noticeable. But as the minutes passed, it grew louder. Eli's heart raced. He turned to Vera, who was already looking out the window, her expression tense. They found us, Vera whispered, her eyes wide with fear. A chill ran down Eli's spine. He had been expecting this moment. But now that it was here, he didn't know what to do. He wasn't a fighter. He was just a student, a normal guy who had somehow gotten caught up in this mess. But Vera needed him, and for her, he would do anything. The sound of engines grew louder, and suddenly, a bright light cut through the darkness, sweeping across the trees. The pursuers were closing in, and there was no more time to hide. Eli quickly grabbed Vera's hand and pulled her toward the back door of the cabin. We have to run, Eli said, urgency in his voice. Now. Vera didn't hesitate. She followed him without a word, her heart pounding in her chest. The two of them sprinted through the woods, the sound of their footsteps muffled by the thick underbrush. But behind them, the light from the search craft grew brighter. Eli knew they didn't have much time. As they pushed through the trees, Eli's mind raced. He needed to think fast. Where could they go? How could they escape? His eyes scanned the forest, and then he saw it. An old, abandoned cabin up ahead. It looked like the perfect place to hide, at least for a little while. Over there, Eli shouted, pointing toward the cabin. Vera nodded, her face determined. Together, they sprinted toward the old cabin, hoping it would be enough to protect them from the enemies chasing them. But the light behind them grew closer, and Eli knew their time was running out. They reached the cabin and slipped inside, locking the door behind them. The darkness inside was thick and suffocating. Eli could hear their breaths coming fast, both of them struggling to stay calm. The sound of the search craft hovered overhead, its light cutting through the forest, searching for any sign of movement. The two of them sat in the darkness, their hearts racing, waiting for the moment when the hunters would find them, or when they would be able to escape once again. The old cabin was silent, except for the sound of their breathing. Eli and Vera sat in the darkness, listening carefully as the search craft hovered above them. The searchlight swept over the forest, its beam growing brighter and closer with every passing second. Eli's mind raced. He had to come up with a plan, and fast. They couldn't stay here forever, and hiding in a cabin wasn't going to save them for long. Eli glanced at Vera, who was sitting across from him, her eyes focused on the small window, watching the light outside. Her face was tense, but her eyes held a new resolve. She was no longer the broken princess who had arrived on Earth. There was strength in her now, strength that Eli had helped her find. But he could see the exhaustion in her face, and he knew that, no matter how strong she was, she couldn't face this alone. "We need to move," Eli said quietly, his voice steady despite the fear bubbling up inside. "We can't stay here. They'll find us." Vera turned to him, her gaze sharp. "You're right. But where will we go? They've already found this place." Eli thought for a moment. He knew they had to get off the planet. But how? He wasn't a soldier or a trained fighter. He didn't have the resources or the connections to fight back. But he had one thing that might just be their ticket out. He knew about the military base nearby. It was where they kept old ships, the kind that could fly them off Earth and into space. "They have an old military base about an hour from here," Eli said, his voice gaining confidence. "I've been there a few times. There's a ship there. It's old, but it still works. If we can get there, we can get off this planet." Vera's eyes widened. "A ship?" she asked, disbelief in her voice. "Do you really think we can make it? What if they're waiting for us?" Eli nodded. "It's risky, but it's our best shot. If we don't try, we'll be caught here for sure. We need to take the chance." Vera took a deep breath, her eyes searching his. For a moment, neither of them said anything. They just sat there, the weight of their situation hanging in the air. Finally, Vera stood up, her determination shining through. "You're right," she said, her voice firm. "Let's go. I'll follow you." Eli stood up as well, feeling a rush of adrenaline. It was time to move. He quickly gathered what little supplies they had, water, food, and a few basic tools, and shoved them into a small bag. He looked at Vera, who was already standing by the door, ready to go. "Stay close to me," Eli said, his voice low. "We move fast and quiet. The last thing we want is for them to find us." Vera nodded. "I know." The two of them crept out of the cabin and into the dark forest. The search craft was still hovering above them, its light sweeping through the trees, but they stayed low, moving through the underbrush. Eli's heart raced as they ran, each step bringing them closer to the military base, but also closer to danger. They had no idea what awaited them. The hunt was on, and they had no choice but to run. The night air was cold, biting at Eli and Vera as they moved through the forest. Every step felt like it was taking them farther from safety and deeper into danger. The search craft's bright light swept over the trees, casting shadows that seemed to follow them at every turn. Eli's heart pounded in his chest. He didn't know how long they had before the craft would circle back, but he knew they had to keep moving. "Stay close," Eli whispered, his voice low but urgent. Vera nodded silently, her eyes scanning the darkness around them. She was exhausted, but her determination pushed her forward, step by step. She had been running for so long, but now, for the first time in days, she felt something like hope. Maybe, just maybe, they could make it. They moved quietly through the woods, keeping their footsteps light, avoiding branches and leaves that might give them away. The old military base was just ahead, but the closer they got, the more tense Eli became. He didn't know what to expect when they reached it. It wasn't a high-security place. At least it hadn't been when he visited years ago. But with the enemies hunting them, Eli couldn't be sure of anything. "We're almost there," Eli muttered, glancing over at Vera. She nodded, her eyes focused ahead. She was breathing heavily now, her legs sore, but she didn't complain. She hadn't once since they started running. As they neared the edge of the base, Eli felt a mix of dread and excitement. The place was dark, the buildings looming like abandoned ghosts in the shadows. The quiet was almost unnerving. No guards, no patrols. But that didn't mean they were safe. The enemy could be right around the corner. Eli signaled to Vera to stay low and moved cautiously toward the entrance. He remembered the old security codes the guards used to punch in at the gate. His heart skipped as he approached the keypad. If he couldn't remember the code, it would all be over. He reached into his pocket, pulling out a small device he had used for hacking in the past. It was a long shot, but he had no other choice. Vera stood back, watching as Eli worked quickly, his fingers flying over the device. The light from the search craft flashed above them again. But it seemed farther away now. Eli's heart raced as he typed in the code. "Please, let it work." A soft beep echoed in the night, and the gate slowly creaked open. Eli breathed a sigh of relief. It wasn't much, but it was enough. They were in. The two of them crept inside, their footsteps muffled on the dirt path that led to the hangar where the ship was stored. The closer they got to the hangar, the more hopeful Eli felt. The ship was old, but it was still functional. He'd seen it himself. It was their only chance. They reached the hangar door, and Eli pushed it open, revealing the old ship hidden inside. It was battered, covered in dust, but it was still intact. The ship looked like it had seen better days, but for Eli and Vera, it was their ticket out of this nightmare. "We made it," Eli whispered, a sense of relief washing over him. But their relief was short-lived. A sudden noise from behind them froze both of them in place. The sound of boots on the ground. Someone was coming. The search craft was getting closer again. Eli's eyes locked onto Vera's. They couldn't wait any longer. He grabbed her hand and pulled her into the ship, slamming the hatch shut just as the footsteps grew louder. The ship's engines hummed to life, a low growl of power that vibrated through the floor. "We're leaving now," Eli said, his voice firm. The ship lurched forward, the familiar hum of the engines filling the air. They were finally escaping Earth, finally leaving the danger behind. But as the ship lifted off the ground, Eli couldn't shake the feeling that the hardest part was just beginning. The ship's engines roared as it soared through the atmosphere, the ground below them quickly becoming a blur of lights and shadows. Eli gripped the controls tightly, his eyes focused on the path ahead. Vera sat beside him, her gaze distant, lost in thought. For a moment, they were both silent, as if the rush of escape had finally settled in. "We did it," Eli said, letting out a breath he didn't realize he was holding. Vera nodded, but the relief on her face was quickly replaced by a look of concern. "It's not over yet," she said softly. "They'll come for us." Eli glanced over at her. He could see the weight of her words, the fear that still gripped her, but he refused to let it pull them down. They were finally free, out of the reach of Earth's atmosphere, and for the first time in what felt like forever, Eli felt a sense of hope. "We'll figure it out," he reassured her. "You'll be safe now." Vera didn't answer. Instead, she stared out the window at the vast expanse of space, her thoughts seemingly far away. Eli understood. She had been through so much, losing everything she had known. The pain of betrayal still lingered in her eyes. "Eli," she said after a long pause, her voice barely a whisper. "There's something I need to tell you." Eli turned to her, his brow furrowing. "What is it?" Vera took a deep breath, as if gathering the courage to speak the words. "There's a reason my enemies haven't killed me yet. There's a reason they've been hunting me. It's not just because I'm the heir to the throne. It's because of you." Eli's heart skipped a beat. "What do you mean?" Vera's eyes met his, and for the first time, there was something in them that Eli couldn't quite place, something that looked like regret. "Your family, Eli," she said. "They're not just regular people. Your family has ties to my empire, deep ties. You're not just some random human. You have a purpose in this." Eli felt like the ground had been pulled out from under him. He had no idea what Vera was talking about. He was just a normal college student. At least he thought he was. "My family," Eli repeated, his voice cracking. "What are you talking about? I don't know anything about any empire." Vera looked away, her face softening with a mixture of guilt and sorrow. "You're part of a lineage I didn't expect to find. Your bloodline, Eli, it's tied to mine in ways I didn't understand until recently. The truth is, you might be more connected to my throne than you realize." Eli's mind spun. His family had always been normal. They had never been royalty or connected to anything as grand as an empire. His father was a teacher. His mother worked as a nurse. There was nothing special about him. Nothing that could explain what Vera was saying. "Why didn't you tell me sooner?" Eli asked, his voice shaking. "Why didn't you warn me about this?" Vera closed her eyes, her voice barely a whisper. "I didn't know how. I didn't want to drag you into my world. But now it's too late. The moment we escaped, your enemies knew. They'll come for you too, Eli. You're part of this war now, whether you like it or not." Eli felt a knot form in his stomach. He had been trying to protect her, but now, it seemed, he was caught in the web of her past, a past he didn't understand. He had thought he was just helping a lost alien princess. Now he was finding out he was part of something much bigger, something dangerous. "We're not safe," Vera said quietly, as if reading his thoughts. "They'll stop at nothing to get what they want. And now, they'll come for you too." Eli sat back in his seat, staring out into the endless black of space. He had no idea what the future held, but one thing was clear. He couldn't turn back now. He was already in too deep. Eli sat at the control panel, his fingers hovering over the ship's controls. The quiet hum of the engines filled the cabin, but his mind was far from calm. The truth Vera had revealed was still sinking in. His family's hidden connection to her empire, the betrayal, the danger. It was too much to process. And yet, everything was happening so fast. He didn't have the luxury of time to figure it all out. Vera was sitting next to him, her face tense with concern as she looked out the window at the stars streaking by. She had barely spoken since their conversation, lost in thought as she tried to piece together her past and her future. Eli glanced at her. "What now?" he asked, his voice tight with anxiety. Vera turned to him, her violet eyes filled with a mix of sorrow and resolve. "We make a stand," she said quietly. "My enemies are closing in, and we can't run forever. They'll be waiting for us wherever we go." Eli's chest tightened. He wasn't a soldier. He wasn't a fighter. But there was no turning back now. If he had learned anything in the past few days, it was that he couldn't sit back and let the people who had betrayed Vera to destroy everything she had fought for. "We'll fight," Eli said, surprising even himself with the confidence in his voice. "We'll find a way." Vera looked at him for a long moment, as if trying to gauge if he truly understood the weight of what he was saying. Finally, she nodded. "There's a place," Vera said, her voice steady now. "A stronghold. It's where my supporters are waiting. If we can reach it, we might have a chance. But it won't be easy." Eli's heart raced. "How far is it?" he asked. "Not far," Vera replied. "But they're already searching for us. It won't be long before they catch up." Eli didn't hesitate. "Then we have to move fast." With a quick push of the controls, the ship adjusted its course toward Vera's stronghold. As they neared the destination, Eli's stomach churned with anticipation. This was it, the final confrontation. He had no idea what to expect. All he knew was that he couldn't let Vera face it alone. The ship entered the atmosphere of a nearby planet, its surface covered in dense forests and rocky terrain. The stronghold was hidden deep within a mountain range, a place so isolated that it had been able to survive the constant attacks from Vera's enemies. But as they neared the stronghold, the sound of engines filled the air again. The unmistakable hum of a fleet, a force that was unmistakably pursuing them. Vera's enemies were already here. "They're close," Vera whispered, her hand gripping the armrest. Eli's heart raced. They had no more time to waste. The ship began to descend, and the landscape below became clearer. A network of caves and tunnels marked the entrance to the stronghold. "We have to land inside," Vera urged. "It's the only way we can get to the heart of the base." Eli guided the ship down, skillfully navigating through the narrow entrance. He could feel the ship's frame shake as they neared the ground, but his focus was unwavering. The stronghold was their last hope. The ship landed with a soft thud, and immediately Eli and Vera jumped into action. They grabbed their gear, and as soon as the hatch opened, they were greeted by a group of loyal supporters who had been waiting for Vera's return. But as they moved toward the entrance of the stronghold, the sound of approaching engines grew louder. They weren't alone anymore. The enemies were here. Eli looked at Vera, determination burning in his eyes. "We're ready," he said. Vera nodded, her face set in a determined expression. "We fight together. We're not running anymore." The battle was about to begin. The stronghold, Vera's last line of defense, was ready for the final confrontation. And Eli was no longer just a bystander. He was a part of it. He would stand with Vera, no matter what came next. The stronghold was alive with the hum of activity as Eli and Vera entered the main command center. Her supporters, a mix of loyal soldiers and civilians, were already preparing for the fight ahead. The tension in the air was thick, as if the very walls were holding their breath in anticipation. Eli could feel the weight of what was about to happen pressing down on him. This wasn't just about survival anymore. It was about everything Vera had lost, and everything she was fighting to reclaim. Eli turned to Vera, who was standing at the front of the room, her face set in determination. Her eyes were sharp, focused on the holographic map of the area, tracking the movements of her enemies. Despite everything, there was a calmness to her now that Eli hadn't seen before. She was no longer just a princess on the run. She was a leader. "We don't have much time," Vera said, her voice low but steady. "They're closing in on us. This is our chance to take back what's mine. We fight for the future." Eli nodded, feeling the weight of her words settle into his chest. He wasn't just fighting for Vera anymore. He was fighting for a chance at something greater. For a chance to make things right. Vera turned to the group of soldiers who had gathered in the command center. "Prepare for battle," she ordered. "We won't give up without a fight." The soldiers moved with precision, quickly gathering their weapons and securing the defenses. Eli stood back, watching them work. He wasn't a soldier. He didn't know how to fight like they did. But he wasn't going to back down. Not now. Not when Vera had placed her trust in him. As the minutes ticked by, the sound of approaching ships grew louder. The enemy was here. Vera's enemies, the ones who had betrayed her, the ones who had hunted her for so long, had finally caught up. The final confrontation was inevitable. Eli turned to Vera, who was now preparing her own weapon. It was a sleek alien device, unlike anything Eli had ever seen before. "Are you sure about this?" he asked, his voice thick with concern. "This isn't just a fight for your throne. They'll kill us all if we're not careful." Vera met his gaze with a fierce resolve. "I'm sure. This is the only way. We take a stand now, or we lose everything." Eli didn't hesitate. He grabbed a rifle from the armory and loaded it with shaking hands. It wasn't much, but it was all he had. He wasn't going to let Vera face this alone. The walls of the stronghold shook as the first blast hit the outer perimeter. The battle had begun. The sound of gunfire and explosions filled the air as the enemies breached the outer defenses. Eli's heart pounded in his chest as he followed Vera and the others into the heart of the stronghold. The fight was fierce, but Vera's soldiers were prepared. They fought with everything they had, determined to protect their princess. Eli moved with them, doing his best to stay out of the way but still contributing where he could. His heart raced with every step, the fear rising in his chest as the sounds of battle grew louder. But Vera was right beside him, leading the charge, never once faltering. Her strength gave him the courage to keep going. Finally, they'd reached the center of the stronghold, where Vera's most trusted allies had gathered. The final battle would take place here. The enemy forces were closing in, but Eli felt something shift inside him. He wasn't just protecting Vera anymore. He was protecting the future that she could still build if they won this fight. The enemy soldiers stormed in, their weapons aimed at Vera, but Eli stepped forward, firing his weapon with steady hands, his heart filled with determination. They couldn't let her fall now. For the first time, Eli realized that he wasn't just a bystander in this war. He was a part of it, and he would fight with everything he had. The battle raged on around them, chaos echoing through the stronghold as the sound of gunfire and explosions filled the air. Eli's hands were steady now, his mind focused. The fear he had felt in the beginning was gone, replaced by a sense of purpose that he couldn't explain. He wasn't just fighting for survival anymore. He was fighting for Vera's future, and, in a way, for his own. Vera stood beside him, her eyes sharp, her weapon aimed at the approaching enemy soldiers. Her movements were fluid, precise, a leader in her element. Eli watched her, awed by the strength she had shown throughout this entire ordeal. She had come so far, and now she was ready to reclaim what was hers. "We're almost there," Vera said, her voice steady, though her breathing was heavy. "Just a little longer." Eli nodded, his heart pounding in his chest. The enemy was retreating, but not without a fight. The stronghold was still under attack, and they needed to finish what they had started. Together, they had fought through everything: betrayal, fear, loss, and now they stood at the threshold of victory. But just as Eli thought they were close to winning, a loud roar echoed through the base. A heavy explosion shook the walls, sending debris flying. The ground beneath them trembled, and Eli lost his balance, falling to the ground. He looked up to see a group of enemy soldiers charging toward them, weapons aimed. "Vera!" Eli shouted, but she was already moving, her weapon raised. She fired with precision, taking down one soldier after another. But the enemy kept coming. Eli scrambled to his feet, his hand gripping his rifle. He wasn't going to let her face this alone. They had come too far. He stepped forward, firing his weapon with determination, pushing back the enemy forces. The battle seemed endless, but slowly the tide began to turn. The enemy's forces were thinning, and the defenders of the stronghold were gaining ground. Eli could feel it. The end was near. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the last of the enemy soldiers fell. The stronghold was theirs. Vera stood in the center of the room, her chest heaving as she took in the victory. Her eyes met Eli's, and for the first time since they had met, she smiled. A true, unguarded smile. "We did it," she said, her voice soft with relief. Eli walked over to her, feeling a weight lift from his shoulders. The battle was over, and they had won. The stronghold was secure, and the future was uncertain, but for the first time, he believed they could face whatever came next. Vera looked around at the survivors, her people, who were beginning to regroup and tend to the wounded. "This isn't the end," she said, her voice filled with determination. "It's just the beginning." Eli nodded. He had no idea what the future held, but he knew one thing: he would be by Vera's side, no matter what. The fight for her empire wasn't over, but together, they could face it. For the first time since they had met, Eli felt a sense of belonging. He had started as a regular college student, unsure of what he was getting into, but now he was a part of something much bigger. He was a part of Vera's world. As they stood there, side by side, Eli realized that he had found a new purpose. He wasn't just a bystander anymore. He was an active participant in a fight for justice, a fight for the future of an entire empire. And for the first time, he felt ready. The future was uncertain, but with Vera by his side, Eli knew they could face anything. Together, they would rebuild. And this time, they would do it right.